Thank you for that, and thanks for inviting me again to participate in such an interesting session. So, before I start, some of the presenters today are going to be talking about big data, like Daniel has done, and some of the people that's going to be talking afterwards, which are really interesting tools to identify and reduce the number of corruption cases, or at least send us some signals about them. So the work I'm going to be presenting today is going to have a slightly different approach, in the sense that I will talk about the corruption cases, scandals in Spain, and identifying and analyzing what red flags or what corruption techniques were happening in those cases, and how those could have been avoided or not through data analysis. So given all the corruption scandals we have in Spain, probably sticking to 20 minutes is going to be challenges, but I'll try my best. So, so the way I did it was reviewing the judgments from courts and legal materials, and trying to understand the individual cases and what were the practices used by government to award contract with certain irregularities. And then there will be a final thought on how this could be avoided in the first instance. So I analyzed, sorry for that. I analyzed 5 main cases looking at the impacts they had in terms of economics, in terms of the economic impact, in terms of the social impact, in terms of political impact. So those are the one on the right. Daniel was presenting a framework of how corruption works. It would be impossible with all the cases we have in Spain to have a single framework to feed all of them, but this is more or less how the corruption cases have been working in Spain for the last decade. So starting with the red flags and the corruption techniques, one of the main findings of my research is that most of the irregularities occurring in public procurement, as in the case of the internet, happen in the dark web, in the underground, so that is minor contract. For those in the room that are slightly less familiar with this, it means that a contract not reaching a threshold will have a lot less tight legislation about it, and then the government should have less problems in terms of competition, publicity, and transparency. So in a country where more than 80% of the contracts are not publicly available at the EU level, there is a scope for wrongdoings. And the Gurzo case is a really, really beautiful case for that. For that example, we had more than 70 contracts, minor contracts awarded for the same company in the region of Madrid. And also in Valencia, we had the same company delivering all the services for the governing party, and all the contracts were awarded through a negotiated without publicity. And all the companies that were competing for the contracts were from the same business groups. So this is, to put this in context, Daniel was showing a picture like this, but this is for the case of Spain. This is all the minor contracts that were published in the procurement, the government procurement platform. So you can see a very beautiful pack just before the threshold, both for 17,999 and 49,999. So you can see that we have more contracts just in the last spot of 1,000 euros compared to the other 4, and that's very, very interesting. And the same if we look at the marginal 110 euros. So my very naive hypotheses are 3. So we got the first one, which is a contract which has a lower value than the threshold, is artificially inflated just to get as much as they can, which means poor value for money for the taxpayers. My second hypothesis is that a contract with a higher value of threshold, above the threshold, is artificially lower to avoid competition and avoid other companies being aware of this contract going on, and therefore poor value for money for taxpayers. And definitely my favorite one, which is that those are the real values of the contracts. So this is naturally occurring, so that means that when the thresholds are changing with the new legislation, 17,999 and 49,999 is still going to be there. Another of the techniques that were very common in the corruption cases that I was looking at were the abuse of unjustified non-open or urgent procedures. So this is done normally to restrict the number of companies that can bid for the contract, or even decide what companies can bid. So I will not get into much detail because of time constraint, but there was this case in 2016 where 3 companies were invited to bid for a contract of 64,000 euros. So 2 other companies were from the same business group, and the third company, the economic activity of the third company was not even related to the object of the contract, which is, once again, very interesting. And probably one of my favorite cases is the one in Alicante last Christmas. So they used the urgent procedure to contract Christmas lighting, because if there's something you cannot plan for, is that Christmas will come in December. So yes, interesting. So in this graph, I have plot, oops, I'm pretty sure you cannot read that, but in this, you have the type of non-open procedures in both Spain and TED, excluding Spain, with contracts getting from the TED data set. So you can see, well, probably you can't, but these 2 ones on the right, the 2 on the right are the negotiated procedures with, the third column is negotiated without publicity, and you can see that is 40% of all the contracts not being open in Spain were done through that. And there have been some changes in the legislation now, so that could probably improve. But yeah, let's wait and see. Daniel has been talking about contract modifications after the award. That is a very common practice in Spain as well. Especially the Palmarena case, which was on the news this morning, because there was the government contracted the building of a velodrome for 45 million euros that ended up costing 90 million euros, which is almost double the price. So I think this is a really important technique in the case of Spain, because a lot of companies made a relatively low offer when they are bidding to avoid competition, because they know they will face no opposition when they get the contract to do all these wrongdoings. And yeah, sorry. So the next flag is about the irregularities on the selection of the criteria. This seems to me that it's going to be really tricky to, at the state we are with the data, it's going to be really tricky to find out any patterns on it. So 70% of companies surveyed by the Eurobarometer 2013 thought that this technique is really, really extended in the country. So some of the individual contracts that the National Court of Auditors were looking at, they found that governments do actually use objective criteria, but they only assessed if companies got enough points on the subjective criteria first. So they create a fake illusion that objective criteria is going to be used, but then it's not, because they're not going to. The companies are not going to get through the subjective criteria. I think this red flag is self-explanatory. So they give contracts and they don't justify why they're doing it. Itself, it might not mean corruption at all, but it just, if there is reason for you to award a contract for such a company, why don't you just justify it? So the National Court of Auditors constantly denounce that there is no information on this section, which is worrying. And just to give you some example on this, the Formula 1 case in Valencia, so they found some of the documents justifying the award of the contract were added after the award of the contract, which means the contract was awarded with no justification on it. So they was just creating the illusion of having that information in advance. And I could spend probably the rest of the evening and part of tomorrow talking about irregularities in Spain, but there's a tight agenda. So just really briefly, and because Daniel has been talking about it, I would not focus a lot more. Collusive behavior between companies, lot of evidence on public administrations being aware of this happening and not taking action to sort this, which leads once again to poor value for money. And a lot of the times, well, compared to the European Commission says that it would be good if less than 5% of the contracts, well, the threshold should be 5 or less, should be publicized. But we are above 11, which is not very well. What I'm going to be showing now is a table with a list of indicators of good performance by the European Commission, which, assuming, well, you can see Spain is not the best, one of the best performers. One bidder is what Daniel has been talking about. I will not make more on that. I think it's important, the missing values that also the first presenter has been talking about, and how Spain is only performing as the adequate level into other good practice indicators. To put this a little bit more in context, we see, well, you can see that is, okay, so that is Spain, the one on the right, the one on the left is the Czech Republic. You can see Spain is the second worst performer of the whole Europe, and some other countries added there, just behind the Czech Republic. I would like to highlight, I'm not suggesting these are the right indicators, and the threshold that the European Commission sets as good or bad is something I would agree on, but this is just to put a little bit more context on this. I would like to, before I finish, talk a little bit more about the control mechanisms, how some of these cases have been talking about, and the red flags could have been detected, and what the European Union views are on this. And as you can see, it's not very good. We don't have control mechanisms either before the award of the contract or after the award of the contract, which leads to a high inflow of corruption cases in the courts. And so the new legislation comes with this revolutionary idea of an independent corruption monitoring body, incorporating independent staff selected by ministers, so just to manage expectations. On the other hand, we have very effective appeal courts, which are working really hard to resolve conflicts in public procurement. However, they can, well, the law is saying they only intervene if one of the parties involved in the process denounces any irregularity. So that leads to open procedures having a lot more denounces than non-open procedures. So just a few thoughts from me on how this, to wrap up a little bit, how all these corruption scandals and corruption techniques could have been controlled a little bit better. And my first point would be on the legislation, not suggesting to change it. I think I'm a little bit late for that, but it's about how we communicate the legislation. Is a terribly complicated legislation. We used to have more than 20,000 contracting entities, which means not all of them will probably understand what the legislation is about. I think we should do, and Civio is doing a really good work on this, on how we communicate what the legislation implies for awarding contracts. For example, I work for the British government. There is a lot of how we emphasize the laws we're creating, how we make sure people's understanding what is required from them. For example, the Competition and Market Authority, they're doing a lot of work on merging and competition laws to make sure business understand what is expected from them. And I think that's something we could probably take from it. Yes, in terms of data, probably I'm just going to be repeating what has been said so far. But we need more information, we need to collect more information, and we need that information to be more consistent across the country. We also, from what we've seen, a lot of the corruption happens in the minor contract space, we don't collect enough information on it. There is a I wouldn't say a terrible mess, but it's quite messy to try to aggregate all the data from different regions. And what is really important for me is that we don't collect much information on what happens with the contract once it has been awarded. Is the company satisfied with the conditions of the contract or is not? And what is doing the administration about it? I think some of the cases we've briefly mentioned today will have not been able to be detected by a red flag system yet because the data is not really good and because of the complicated corruption frameworks that we have in this country. I don't think we are at a stage where these might be able to be detected. In terms of making it more easy and transparent to everybody, it's once again about aggregating data in an open format that everybody could use and should be machine readable formats as well. And yeah, sorry to be repeating myself about minor contracts, but I think it is a big thing. It's a big thing we should be paying a lot more attention than we actually do. And the last bit about the control mechanisms, I think it would be very interesting to start linking data sets from different sources, not only using public procurement data, but also appeal courts data, so we can see whether some company has been detected to be trying to commit irregularities in the past and certain contracting entities as well. And that might help some problems with the way the data is input into the system. And one of my proposals, which was not very well, it had some challenge the last conference is about opening the possibility of denouncing to more people than only the competing companies. I'm still strong about it. I still think there should be more opportunities for people to denounce where they think irregularities are taking place, because at the end of the day, that is what citizens are meant to be doing. And the last bit, just defending the justice system in the country. I think there should be a better allocation of resources. So I'm sure they could do a much better job if they had the resources to do it. And that is it.
So we have time for one or two. We have time for one or two questions. So, come on, who's up for it?
Thanks very much. Very interesting also, the presentation is very interesting. On the question of the, just to clarify the last point, the right of citizens to denounce corruption, do you mean it's something we talked about, I know Civio has been thinking about it, but just to be clear what you're saying, you're talking about citizens or CSOs having legal standing to take legal challenges, or just having enough information to go to the prosecutor and say we think that there's just to be clear what you're actually proposing.
Yeah, it's probably more on the second option, I guess.
But surely any organisation that gets, what I'm not clear is if you're proposing some kind of specific legal mechanism, because any organisation that gets information, journalists can write about corruption, people can make a noise about it, people pass information that they've collected to prosecutors. So I just trying to understand what you're proposing and why it's controversial.
Well, I agree. I don't know why it was controversial either. So what I was suggesting is if any citizens has any information that some irregularity is taking place, they should have the right to go somewhere and denounce it. I'm not saying we should change the legal system. I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not really going to get into that dangerous place. But what I would say, there should be some mechanism for them to denounce it, whether it is through other organizations that they can collect that information and make legal change for it. That's.
But a formal mechanism, so not an actual sort of formal complaint mechanism.
Yeah.
To an oversight body like a citizen's channel for the prosecutors or something that's a little bit more structured and formal to encourage people and to make sure that when there is a
Yeah.
formal follow-up on
Yeah,
that,
exactly.
which fits with your thing about having
Mhm.
resources.
Yeah.
as well. Okay,
Yeah.
thanks for the clarification.
No, that's fine.
I think we have time for one more because we are actually on time, so it's great. All the Spanish students are falling apart. You had a question.
I always have questions. I don't want to be the one making all the questions today, but I wanted to know, as we're talking about corruption cases in Spain, and I think maybe it would be interesting to know your opinion. What would you say if there are really differences between Spanish corruption and the rest of Europe, and the corruption in the rest of Europe? If Spain is different, is that? And the question is important for me because we've been trying to work on how, on trying to imagine best control mechanisms.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if we can use the same in all the countries in Europe or if we need to go local
Yeah.
to avoid
Okay.
or identify this kind of.
Yeah, I cannot tell you about the rest of Europe as a whole. I can tell you about the UK, which is where I'm living, and it's definitely not the same. So it's not the same. It's not the same level of corruption scandals all the time. There's some corruption. It's not normally on public procurement. There has been some scandals in the past, but definitely it's not the magnitude of this. So many companies involved. There's not so many. I think in Spain the problem with it is being I hate the word, institutionalized. So it's in the institutions itself. I've seen in the UK in the past there have been some corruption scandals. It's been individual cases doing wrongdoings. In Spain it feels like it's at an institutional level, and that is what is worrying, because it's not, what I found with these cases is not like a party-related thing, and it's not a region-related thing. It is across the country, across the parties, and it doesn't matter what ideology you have. So it's not as easy as, to solve that problem when it's all over the place. And in terms of, your second question was about control mechanisms, about which we should do. So I think in England we have an option which is like a whistleblower, which is more or less, she's not here anymore. Oh, there you are. So, so that is, what I was telling you about, having a whistleblower mechanism, in terms of whether we should be able to adapt that thing, I think that would be great. Having some opposition in the conference in December makes me wonder why people doesn't like the idea. It's because people will start irrationally denouncing cases because they have personal things about it. Is that why he was saying that?
Because some people wasn't there in December, but the thing is that you cannot begin something against a public worker without this public worker knowing who is beginning that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of in the law.
Mm-hmm.
But for example, now we have like a secure channel to send this kind of maybe alert, something similar to the competence control body agency. So you can say, okay, some problem with competence here, but not some problem with corruption here. So we are
Yeah.
that's the situation right now in Spain.
Yeah.
Okay, so is it your question or is it comment?
About what is, I am Alexandra, I'm coming from the Generalitat of Catalonia. We tried, and we are working in a kind of committee formed by public servants that studies cases that people can denounce,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
denounce, about not really corruption, but conflict of interest.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
We prepared this committee. You can ask by the web with a kind of anonymous question. And unfortunately, we just have 2 questions for 6 months or more, no, nearly a year. So what you said, that maybe everybody is coming and announcing, well, this is not happening to us, and it's not because there is no conflict of interest.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that, and we haven't changed any law. We just approved it with government It's just a simple thing. Just a matter you ask your question and what the committee says is telling you there is there's no what you should do, what you shouldn't do. But nobody counts, and we have a big announcement in our webpage, and we just need likes to do it, but nobody comes. So I think it's just, as you said, it's a matter that it's institutionalized, or how you say that, it's in the structure.
Yeah.
It's quite problem.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. Yeah. So it's worrying if people is not denouncing. I think there might be something on the way we communicate this tool is available for them. So it's not that they know they can denounce, it's how we communicate what a conflict of interest is in a way that they can understand it. And because the law is really difficult to understand what a conflict of interest is. If we communicate that in a way people can understand, because as you say, everybody's talking about it. So obviously there should be more examples out there. If they are not denouncing, okay, that's surprising, but yeah. Sorry?
That maybe we have to explain.
Yeah, I think there is a problem. That's something for us to improve in Spain about the way we communicate with the general public, because sometimes we do good policies. It's just they don't reach because we don't communicate it in the way that people can understand. And a lot of the work that Civio is doing is about how such a complicated law can be translated to something that people can understand, and that is how you increase awareness. That's how you empower citizens to know what the right thing is. And it's brilliant you have such a tool, and that's probably what I was more or less inclined for. But it's just how you communicate what it is, exactly how you communicate what they can denounce, what a conflict of interest is. And I think that's the key point on the message. That's fine.
Yeah, I have a question connected to maybe more in-housing and the movement around re-municipalisation, because I was a bit surprised when you said about the UK and the corruption there, given the Carillion scandal, and the European Court of Auditors yesterday came out with a report on public-private partnerships. So I'm wondering, is there a discussion around anti-corruption measures in terms of local authorities and governments taking back into control things like water and other services? And is there a comparison or discussion around that? So anti-corruption measures, the promise of outsourcing and competition was that it was to deliver better returns. But actually, a lot of studies now are showing that this isn't delivering, and is a better anti-corruption measure for the governments, well, at whatever level, national or local, to take on delivering these services themselves.
I am afraid I haven't got your question. Can you be a little bit more specific about what you're asking for, sorry?
I'm just wondering, in terms of your experience around the discussion of tackling anti-corruption, that rather than relying on outsourcing and competition in the market, that some better anti-corruption measures might be for governments themselves or local authorities to deliver the services, that the efficiencies on that level are better than
Outsourcing, sorry, I'm terrible with...
Is there more corruption if you outsource the water delivery, or if you bring it back into and try to control
Well, I think...
like a service like water delivery and do it from the public administration itself?
Okay.
Because he was mentioning all these public-private partnerships that are also source of corruption.
Yeah, I think it's not about the model itself. I think that's a lot more tricky. It depends on the system itself. And it could be corruption in either case. I can see it, how it might work. If you outsource and if you're doing in a centralized way, it's a lot easier to be accountable for your decisions, and it's a lot easier than if you're giving a lot of different powers to different local authorities. That's the way I see it. But I don't think that necessarily means more corruption. I think it depends on the country and the culture and the institutions itself.
So thank you, Alejandro. Thank you, Alejandro.